The red light blinked 3 times, then went dead silent. I stood there at 8:47 a.m. on a Monday morning, watching $23 billion worth of banking operations grind to a halt. But let me back up 31 days, because that's when this whole thing started. That's when Tyler Prescott decided to fire me to save money on my pension, thinking he could just replace 31 years of experience with some consultant from Chicago. My name is Raymond Brooks, and I built the digital backbone that kept Midwest Federal Bank running. Every transaction, every security protocol, every fail-safe, I designed it all. And buried deep in that code was something I called the Guardian Protocol. Not a bomb, not a virus. Just a simple rule. If the original architect gets terminated without proper succession procedures, the system protects itself until someone qualified takes over. Tyler thought he could just plug in a replacement like changing a light bulb. He was wrong. So there I was that Monday morning, 31 days after he'd walked me out, watching every ATM screen across 12 states display the same message: service temporarily unavailable. Every mobile banking app had crashed. Every wire transfer was frozen mid-process. And Tyler Prescott, the 33-year-old CEO with the Stanford MBA, was standing behind me in the server room, his face white as paper. "Ray," he whispered, "what did you do?" I turned around and looked at this young executive who thought he could run a bank like a tech startup. The same guy who'd never bothered to read the technical documentation I'd spent 15 years writing. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I didn't do anything. The system is just protecting itself." That's when I saw the understanding hit him. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he was sweating now, realizing that the experienced engineer he'd dismissed as legacy resources had built something he couldn't control. See, most people think this story is about revenge. It's not. It's about what happens when you fire the architect before you understand the blueprint. See, I'd gotten the call Friday afternoon. Tyler's assistant, a young professional who probably earned more than I did my first 10 years, asked if I could pop by Tyler's office Monday morning. Pop by, like I was dropping off cookies for a bake sale. I should have known right then that something was off. But let me back up here, because none of this makes sense without understanding what I built. And I'm not talking about just code here. I'm talking about the digital backbone that kept $23 billion moving through Midwest Federal every single day. Most folks don't realize that when they swipe their card at the gas station or transfer money to their kids, there's a guy like me who built the system that makes it all work. Built it to last too, not like these new engineers who think everything needs to be agile and cloud-based. I started at Midwest Federal in 1993, fresh off a stint doing guidance systems for commercial aircraft. Different industry, same principles. When people's lives depend on your work, you don't cut corners. Period. The bank's computer system back then was held together with duct tape and prayers. Literally took 3 days to process a simple wire transfer, and the whole thing crashed every time someone sneezed too hard. So I rebuilt it from the ground up. Took me 4 years, working nights and weekends. But when I was done, we had something special. Something that just worked day after day, year after year. And here's the thing nobody knew. I built in what I called a Guardian Protocol. Not because I was planning some dramatic exit, but because I'd seen too many good systems destroyed by people who didn't understand them. Now, the Guardian Protocol wasn't some kind of master kill switch. Think of it more like a car's computer system. You can replace the radio, change the tires, even swap out the engine. But if you mess with the main control module without the right tools and knowledge, the whole car goes into protection mode. That's what I built into the authentication framework that every single banking operation depended on. The technical part gets complicated, but here's the simple version. I designed 3 core security modules that handled customer authentication, transaction validation, and system integrity checks. These modules were like the foundation of a house. Everything else was built on top of them. And yes, I filed patents on all 3 through my LLC, Brooks Technical Solutions, back in 2008 during the financial crisis when everyone was cutting corners and demanding quick fixes that would have compromised security. The bank knew about the patents. It was all documented in our licensing agreement that got renewed automatically every year. Standard arrangement, really. I kept ownership of my innovations. They got to use them. Everybody won. What made it interesting was the ethical safeguard I'd built in. If the patent holder got terminated without proper transition procedures, the licensing agreement had a 30-day grace period to work out succession. Miss that window, and the system would lock down to protect itself from unauthorized modifications. Call it insurance for integrity. But like I said, that was all theoretical. I figured I'd retire peacefully, hand over the keys to Mike Torres, he's a good engineer, been learning the system for 8 years, and spend my golden years restoring my 1970 Dodge Challenger. Simple plan, clean exit. Then Tyler Prescott showed up. Tyler got hired as CEO 2 years ago after the bank acquired his fintech startup. 33 years old, Stanford MBA, the kind of guy who uses words like synergize in casual conversation. The board loved him because he talked a good game about modernization and efficiency. What they didn't know, what Tyler didn't know, was that his whole startup had been built on top of basic banking APIs that connected to systems guys like me had built decades ago. Here's what I learned later from Janet Morrison in legal. Tyler was under incredible pressure from the board. They'd given him 18 months to cut operating costs by 25% or face termination himself. My pension payout, $2. $1 million was the biggest single-line item he could eliminate without having to explain complex layoffs to shareholders. From his perspective, getting rid of one expensive older employee before he could fully vest was a straightforward business decision. Problem was, Tyler never bothered to read the technical documentation, never looked at the patent agreements, never asked anyone what might happen if the senior systems architect suddenly disappeared. From day one, Tyler treated anyone over 50 like we were outdated equipment. Started calling us legacy resources in meetings. Legacy resources. Like we were obsolete machinery instead of the people who actually knew how everything worked. But I kept my mouth shut. I had 1 year left, and I wasn't about to let some young executive with a superiority complex ruin my retirement. The tension started building about 6 months ago when Tyler brought in his innovation team, 5 recent graduates who thought they could revolutionize banking with an app and some artificial intelligence. Bright kids, but they didn't understand that behind every sleek interface is a foundation that took decades to build properly. When they started proposing changes that would have bypassed my security protocols, I spoke up. Politely, professionally, but firmly. That's when I became a problem. Tyler started excluding me from planning meetings. Started talking about generational transitions and knowledge management. The writing was on the wall, but I figured I could ride it out. 1 more year, then I'd be free to work on my car and maybe do some consulting for banks that actually valued experience. I was wrong, so there I was Monday morning, badge not working, walking up to the security desk like some kind of stranger. The guard, Tommy, been there almost as long as me, looked embarrassed when he had to call upstairs for clearance. Sorry, Mr. Brooks. System says your access was revoked at close of business Friday. That's when I knew. Tyler hadn't just decided to let me finish out my time. He'd decided to cut me loose before I could collect my full pension. 31 years, and they were going to cheat me out of the benefits I'd earned. I made it up to Tyler's office around 9:15. He was sitting behind his glass desk, looking at his laptop instead of me. Didn't offer me a seat. Didn't even look up when I walked in. "Ray," he said, still typing. "Thanks for coming in. My badge didn't work." "Yeah, about that." He finally looked up and I could see the strain around his eyes. The guy looked like he hadn't slept much. "The board has decided to accelerate the transition timeline. We're dissolving your position effective immediately." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was everything you'd expect. Termination paperwork, COBRA information, a check for 2 weeks severance. What wasn't there was my pension payout. 31 years, and they were walking me out the door like I'd stolen something. "This is it?" I asked. "It's a generous package, Ray. 2 weeks pay, and we're not requiring you to sign a non-compete." Generous. 2 weeks pay after 31 years was generous. "What about my pension?" Tyler's face didn't change, but his hands were shaking slightly when he reached for his coffee cup. "HR will be in touch about that. There are some complications with the vesting schedule." Complications. Translation. They were going to fight me on every dollar. I looked at this young executive, and he was young despite the expensive suit and the corporate title, and realized he had no idea what he'd just done. Not just to me, but to the bank, to the system, to the $23 billion that flowed through circuits I'd designed. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice level, "do you know how the core authentication system works?" He blinked. "That's what the tech team is for." "Do you know who designed the security protocols that protect customer data?" Another blink. "Ray, this isn't personal. It's just business." That phrase, "it's just business." Like 31 years of my life was just a line item on a spreadsheet. I stood up, left the paperwork on his desk, and walked out. Didn't say another word. What was the point? He'd already made his decision, and clearly, he thought he could just plug someone else into my spot like changing a light bulb. The walk down to the parking garage felt longer than usual. 31 years. and it ended with a 20-minute conversation in a sterile office. No handshake, no thank you, no acknowledgement of what I'd built. Just, it's not personal. I got in my truck, a 2019 Ford F-150, paid off 3 years early, and sat there for a minute. Part of me wanted to march back upstairs and tell Tyler exactly what he'd just triggered. But another part of me, the engineer part, was curious to see how long it would take them to figure it out. I started the engine and drove home. It was 9:47 a.m. when I pulled out of the parking garage. The 30-day grace period had officially begun, but Tyler didn't know that. Tyler didn't even know there was a grace period. At exactly 10 a.m. on day 31, the Guardian protocol would activate. Now, I wasn't sitting at home watching the fireworks. I was in my garage trying to install a new carburetor on the Challenger when Mike Torres called. "Ray, what's going on with the system?" Mike Torres is good people. 42 years old, been with the bank for 8 years, and actually understands the architecture I built. If Tyler had any sense, he would have promoted Mike and asked him to transition into my role over the next year. Instead, Tyler had decided to bring in some consultant from Chicago who specialized in legacy system modernization. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Everything's locking up. Authentication servers are rejecting admin credentials, and I'm getting error messages I've never seen before. Something about unauthorized succession protocols." I wiped the grease off my hands and walked over to my workbench where I kept my old system documentation. 23 years of notes, diagrams, and protocol specifications in 3-ring binders. Old school, but reliable. "Mike, do me a favor. Try accessing the core system using the emergency admin account." I already did. Same error. "Ray, it's asking for something called a Guardian override key." There it was. The system was doing exactly what I designed it to do, protecting itself from unauthorized access. Not malicious, not vengeful, just careful, like a good watchdog that doesn't let strangers into the house when the owner's not home. Here's the thing about the Guardian protocol that made it so effective. It wasn't just software, it was architecture. Think of it like a car's anti-theft system, but instead of just preventing the engine from starting, it was integrated into every major component. You could try to bypass it, but that would be like trying to hotwire a modern BMW, technically possible, but you'd need to understand systems that took decades to develop. The authentication modules I'd patented weren't separate programs. They were woven into the fabric of every banking operation. Customer login had to pass through my security framework. Wire transfers validated by my transaction protocols. Even simple balance inquiries depended on the integrity checks I'd built. "Mike, you need to call Tyler. Tell him the system is in protective mode, and it's going to stay that way until the original architect authorizes the transition." What's that mean? It means Tyler made a serious mistake. The next few hours were interesting, to say the least. Mike kept me updated through texts and phone calls. By 11 a.m., the authentication failures had spread to all customer-facing systems. ATMs were offline, mobile banking was down, and wire transfers were backing up like a clogged drain. By noon, local news stations were reporting on the technical difficulties at Midwest Federal. What Tyler didn't realize was that Midwest Federal employed about 2,400 people in our city of 180,000. When word got out that the bank was locked out of its own computer system, folks started getting nervous. Not just customers, employees too. Nobody wants to work for a company that can't access its own data. At 12:30, my phone rang. Tyler Prescott. "Ray, we need you to come in and fix this." "Fix what? Don't play games." "The system is locked up, and Mike says you're the only one who can unlock it." I was still in my garage looking at the Challenger's engine. Amazing how much a 1970 small block resembled the banking system I'd built. Lots of interconnected parts that had to work together perfectly, and if you didn't understand how they connected, you shouldn't be messing with them. "Tyler, I don't work there anymore. Remember you terminated me 3 hours ago?" "This is serious, Ray. We're losing money every minute this thing is down." "Sounds like a problem for your tech team." "Ray, I'll reinstate you. Full salary, full benefits, everything." That got my attention, but not for the reason he thought. "Tyler, do you remember what you said this morning? About it not being personal?" Silence on the other end. "Well, this isn't personal either. It's just architecture. The system doesn't recognize you as an authorized administrator because you violated the succession protocols. And here's the thing about trust. Once it's broken, it's really hard to get back." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you should have read the documentation before you decided to clean house." I hung up and went back to working on the carburetor. Around 2 p.m., Mike called again. "Ray, Tyler's losing his mind. He's got 3 consultants on conference calls, and none of them can figure out how to bypass the Guardian protocol. That's because you can't bypass it, Mike. It's not a separate program you can uninstall. It's built into the foundation, like trying to remove the steering system from a car while it's driving down the highway. So what happens now? Now Tyler learns why you don't fire the architect before the building is finished. See, here's what Tyler didn't understand about systems like the one I built. It's not just code running on servers. It's an ecosystem with built-in checks and balances designed to protect itself from exactly the kind of short-sighted decision-making he just demonstrated. The Guardian protocol wasn't a trap, it was an immune system. And Tyler had just introduced a virus. By 3 p.m., Midwest Federal's stock price had dropped 12%. By 4 p.m., the FBI Cybersecurity Division was asking questions about potential external attacks. By 5 p.m., Tyler was in an emergency board meeting explaining how he'd managed to lock the bank out of its own computer system. That evening, I got a call from Janet Morrison, the bank's head of legal. "Ray, we need to discuss this situation." Janet was one of the good ones. Straight shooter, been with the bank for 15 years, actually read contracts before signing them. "What situation?" "The system lockdown. Tyler says you built some kind of kill switch." "Janet, I didn't build a kill switch. I built a security protocol." "There's a difference. Explain it to me." So I did. I told her about the Guardian protocol, about the patents I'd filed, about the LLC I'd set up to protect the intellectual property. I told her about the documentation that clearly outlined the proper procedures for transitioning system control. There was a long silence when I finished. "Ray, are you telling me that you own the patents to our core authentication framework?" "I own the patents to 3 critical security modules that your entire banking operation depends on, yes." The bank has been operating under a licensing agreement that's been automatically renewed every year for the past 15 years. And this licensing agreement has an ethical succession clause. If the patent holder is terminated without proper transition procedures, there's a 30-day grace period to work out new arrangements. After that, the license becomes void until proper succession protocols are followed. Another long silence. "Ray, Tyler didn't know about the grace period, did he?" "I don't think Tyler reads anything that's more than 2 pages long." "And we're past the 30 days? "As of this morning, yes." Janet sighed. "Ray, what would it take to restore the licensing agreement?" "Proper succession protocols, which means bringing me back as an employee in good standing, conducting a formal knowledge transfer with my designated successor, and ensuring that the transition is handled ethically and professionally." "And Tyler made his choice when he decided to cut corners on my pension." "Actions have consequences, Janet. That's not personal, that's professional." The next morning, I woke up to find news trucks parked outside Midwest Federal's headquarters. The story had gone national. Local bank locked out of own system. The headlines made it sound like I was some kind of disgruntled saboteur who'd planted a digital bomb. That's when I decided to set the record straight. I drafted a simple statement and emailed it to the local news stations. I did not sabotage Midwest Federal's computer system. The current situation is the result of a security protocol I designed 15 years ago to protect the integrity of the bank's digital infrastructure. This protocol activates automatically when proper succession procedures are not followed after the termination of key personnel. I built this safeguard not out of malice but out of responsibility to ensure that critical financial systems remain in the hands of people who understand them. The bank has always had access to complete documentation of this protocol. What happened was not an attack. It was the system protecting itself from unauthorized changes. Within an hour, the narrative started shifting. Former colleagues began calling, offering support. A few other senior engineers from competing banks reached out to say they'd implemented similar safeguards. One engineer from Texas said he'd been following the story and wanted to buy me a beer. But the most interesting call came from Patricia Wells, CEO of Great Plains Trust, Midwest Federal's biggest competitor. "Mr. Brooks, I'd like to offer you a position." "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I'm retired as of yesterday." "I'm not talking about coming out of retirement. I'm talking about consulting. We've been wanting to upgrade our core systems for 3 years, but every vendor we talk to wants to rip out the existing infrastructure and start over. We'd rather work with someone who believes in building things that last." She offered me a 6-month contract at twice my old salary to design a new system for Great Plains Trust. More importantly, she offered me something Tyler never had: respect for my experience and a say in how the project would be managed. Meanwhile, back at Midwest Federal, the board was asking some hard questions. How had they managed to hire a CEO who didn't understand their own technology infrastructure? How had they approved the termination of their senior systems architect without reviewing the potential risks? And most importantly, how were they going to fix this mess? The answer, it turned out, was complicated. Tyler had brought in a team of consultants who specialized in legacy system recovery. For $75,000 a day, they analyzed the Guardian protocol and concluded what Mike Torres could have told them for free. The authentication modules I'd patented were so deeply integrated into the system that replacing them would require rebuilding everything from scratch. Cost estimate, $18 million and 10 months of development time. During those 10 months, Midwest Federal would have to process all transactions manually, like it was 1985. Customer service lines were jammed. Simple wire transfers took 3 days. Online banking was completely offline. The local newspaper ran a story about how the banking crisis was affecting small businesses that depended on quick access to their accounts. The ripple effects were real. Tony's Auto Repair couldn't process credit card payments for a week. The downtown diner went cash only. 3 businesses had to delay payroll because wire transfers were backlogged. People started switching to Great Plains Trust and other competitors just so they could access their money reliably. The stock price dropped another 25%. 4 board members resigned, and Tyler Prescott found himself explaining to federal regulators how he'd managed to cripple a major financial institution in a single morning. 2 weeks after the lockdown started, I got another call from Tyler. He sounded different this time, tired, maybe even a little humbled. "Ray, I need to ask you something." "I'm listening. Did I really mess this up as badly as everyone says?" I was in my garage again, this time adjusting the timing on the Challenger's engine. It was a question I'd been expecting, and I'd been thinking about how to answer it. "Tyler, you made a decision based on incomplete information. That happens, but when you're responsible for other people's livelihoods, you've got a responsibility to understand the systems you're managing. I thought I could just bring in consultants to handle the technical stuff. You can, but you still need to understand the business impact of technical decisions. That's what being a leader means." There was a long pause. "Ray, is there any way to fix this without rebuilding everything?" "There might be, but it would require admitting that the termination was handled improperly and restoring my employee status so I can authorize a proper transition. The board would never approve bringing you back after all this publicity. Then you've got 10 months of manual banking operations ahead of you." 3 months later, Midwest Federal was still struggling with manual processes. They'd hired a new interim CEO, a guy named Bill Patterson, who'd actually run banks before instead of tech startups. Bill's first act was to call me personally. "Mr. Brooks, I'd like to apologize for how you were treated." "Appreciate that, Bill. I've been reviewing the situation and I'd like to make you an offer. Chief Technology Officer, full authority over system architecture, hand-picked team, budget approval for any security upgrades you recommend, plus a formal apology from the board and full restoration of your pension benefits." It was a generous offer, more than generous. But I had already accepted the consulting contract with Great Plains Trust, and I was enjoying the work. Building something new instead of maintaining something old. Working with people who actually wanted my input instead of just tolerating my presence. "Bill, I appreciate the offer, but I'm pretty happy with my current situation. What would it take to get you to consult on the restoration project?" "We could pay you whatever Great Plains is paying plus a bonus for resolving the situation." That got me thinking. Not about the money, but about all the good people still working at Midwest Federal. Mike Torres, Janet Morrison, Tommy in security, folks who didn't deserve to suffer because Tyler made a poor decision. "Bill, I'll make you a deal. I'll consult on restoring the system, but I want Mike Torres promoted to senior systems architect and given full authority over the transition. And I want Tyler removed from any decision-making role in the process. Tyler's already been reassigned to special projects. The board's looking for his replacement. Then we might have something to talk about." 6 months later, Midwest Federal's new system was online. Not as elegant as what I'd originally built, but functional and secure. Mike Torres had done excellent work managing the transition team, and the bank had learned some expensive lessons about the importance of treating experienced employees with respect. Tyler Prescott, meanwhile, had been quietly asked to resign. Last I heard, he was working for a cryptocurrency startup in California, probably learning new ways to disrupt industries he didn't fully understand. Mike called me a few weeks ago to let me know how things were going. "System's stable," he said, "but honestly, Ray, it's not as elegant as what you built originally. These consultants were competent, but they didn't have your intuition for how all the pieces fit together." "Mike, that takes time. Keep working at it, and eventually you'll build something better than what I had. Think you'll ever come back? To Midwest Federal? Not likely, but I'm not done building things yet. And I'm not. The contract with Great Plains Trust has turned into a permanent consulting arrangement. I work 3 days a week, designing systems that will outlast the people who commission them. I spend the other 4 days in my garage, working on classic cars and thinking about the difference between building something and building something right. The Challenger is running perfectly now, by the way. Took me 8 months to get everything dialed in just right, but it was worth the patience. Sounds like thunder when you start it up, but purrs like a kitten at idle. That's what happens when you take the time to do things properly instead of rushing to meet some artificial deadline. Sometimes I drive past the old Midwest Federal building on my way to Great Plains Trust. The parking lot is full again. They hired back most of the employees they'd lost during the crisis, and customer confidence has slowly returned. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but it takes time and consistent effort. But here's what I think about when I see that building. I didn't destroy Midwest Federal. I built something that protected itself when the people running it stopped caring about protection. The Guardian Protocol wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. And if more systems had built-in safeguards like that, maybe we'd have fewer corporate disasters and more companies that actually valued the people who keep them running. Tyler Prescott taught me something important that day he fired me. He taught me that experience isn't just about knowing how to build systems. It's about knowing how to build them so they can't be destroyed by people who don't understand them. That's a lesson I'll carry with me for whatever comes next. And if you're ever in the position to build something important, something that people will depend on, I'd recommend you carry it with you too. Because in the end, the best justice isn't getting even. It's building something so well that it protects itself when you're not around to do it yourself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a carburetor to rebuild.